Hi, welcome back everybody.
We've gathered you all here today.
We've gathered you all here today for Spooky Saturday. It's like Spicy Saturday, but we're going to be reading some spooky stories. This entire month we're going to be doing nothing but spooky content. So I hope you guys enjoy. And if you don't like spooky content, well, maybe we'll see you in November.
See for Christmas time.
Plot twist, we're going to be doing like spooky holiday themed stuff because the holidays and horror go together very well.
They really do. We'll bust out some Krampus.
Krampus? The hell is Krampus?
Anyway. The demon version of Santa?
No, I know, but
I thought you said, what the fuck is Krampus?
No, because I know Krampus, but you said Krampus. I'm like,
Krampus, yeah, same thing.
Potato. Anyway, this first post was posted by user King Payman 23. All hail King Payman. Do you get that reference?
No.
What? Hereditary?
No. Oh, damn.
The demon?
The demon.
2 years ago, my wife disappeared. Some bizarre events happened recently. Anna is the love of my life. The world freezes every time I kiss her, floating in time as if all the problems outside the radius of our intertwined bodies didn't exist. If there is a paradise, I wouldn't think it could be better than the time I spent with her. Even if I'm anxious or stressed, at the end of the day, when I see her, everything is absorbed, and no problem can bring me down as long as she is by my side. Her presence is enough. My deepest dreams are fulfilled. Anna disappeared after a day's work. Her car was found empty on the side of the road, with all of her belongings still there. No signs of struggle or robbery. I notified the police immediately, who searched the forest in the small town where we lived. In vain. After the police gave up, I tried to find her on my own, walking daily in the forest, looking for any sign of what happened to her. My despair and sadness increased as my hope vanished. With all my efforts being futile, I gave up after a few months. My mental state crumbled. I got deeply depressed. During the day, I worked. At night, I drank alone at home. I no longer hung out with my friends. I just sat in the living room looking at the door, fantasizing that one day it would open and Anna would be there, with her warm and contagious smile. 2 years later, the police have long since ceased the search. The impossible happened. The night was lost in the unusual routine, me on the couch, beer in hand, staring into space. Light knocks echoed through the house. Someone was at the door. I got startled. Everyone had already given up visiting me, tired of being ignored. After all, the attempts for my friends to cheer me up always worsened my mood. So, after such failures, I isolated myself, always saying no to leaving my residence for something other than going to work. Due to all this, I imagined that I had dozed off and dreamed about the knocks. A few seconds later, the knocking repeated, so I went to the door, unlocking it. Like my happiest dreams, there she was. Hair shorter than the day she disappeared, but otherwise exactly the same. Anna, the love of my life. May I come in? The delicate voice asked. I froze, unable to decipher the situation, flooded with a mixture of surprise, apprehension, and euphoria. Marco, hey, are you really going to ignore me? I came back to my senses and answered her. Sorry, of course you can come in. The house is yours too. She sat on the sofa, a discreet smile populating her face, alternating glances at me and the floor, as if she was embarrassed to stare for too long. I looked perplexed at the ghost in front of me, containing my hopes a little, even with the concrete figure of my dreams breathing the same air as me again. I unintentionally came across a little rude next. Where were you? Always straight to the point, huh? Can't complain. This is one of the things that made me fall in love with you. She paused for a few seconds and stared at the floor, in a gesture of concentration to remember what had happened. Well, I was returning from work when I saw a person standing in the middle of the forest. I slowed the car down and rolled down the window. The man was screaming for help, looking desperate. I stopped the car and went to him, and I don't remember anything else. Today, I woke up in the same place where I lost my consciousness, and I walked here. I don't know how much time has passed, but by your beard it must have been at least a month. I sat by her side, holding those two delicate hands, which disappeared in mine, and faced her with a serious expression. Anna, I know this is not easy to hear, but you disappeared for 2 years. She remained silent, seeming to understand. I didn't say anything else. Maybe she erased what had happened in the last 2 years because of the trauma. She was probably kidnapped and gone through a lot. If she's ready someday, she knows she can trust me to talk about everything. I took the whole week off and rekindled the lost happiness. It was like she'd never left, interacting as we'd always done for the past 14 years, with that connection written in the stars since our teens. On Friday, I called some friends over to my house. I couldn't wait to share the good news. Strangely though, when they arrived, she was gone.
Oh.
I searched the entire house. No sign of Anna. After a few beers, my friends left. A few minutes later, Anna appeared in front of me with an angry expression. Why didn't you tell me that you would invite people? I wanted to surprise you. They miss you too. I don't like surprises. Talk to me next time. She went to the bedroom and slammed the door. I slept on the couch that night. In the following week, I went back to work. On the way home, with the new curiosity rooted in my brain, I started to observe the forest while driving. The answer to what had happened to Anna was in the middle of that green immensity. One day, looking to the trees as I drove slowly, I saw a man staring at the road. I pulled over and rolled down the car window. Hello? Are you lost? The man immediately turned away from me and ran into the middle of the forest. As soon as I got home, I described the anomalous scenario to Anna. After all, there was no house near that inhospitable region, and there's nothing to do there. Honey, in the same place where you disappeared, I saw a person standing still. It could be the kidnapper or some accomplice of his. We should tell the police. No! She seemed bothered for the second time since she had returned. Don't go into the forest. The important thing is that I came back. There's no need to dig up the past. Promise me you'll never go in there. It's dangerous. I couldn't argue. Anna left me talking to myself. Obviously, I found her speech strange. Could it be that she remembered something? I didn't confront her, but every time I saw her, I contained myself from asking what were the dangers in the forest that she wanted to warn me about. After the initial happiness of Anna's return, I noticed some unusual behaviors. She never left the house, nor interacted with anyone other than me, not even on social media. One day, as we were cooking dinner, she put her hand into the fire, and only took it off after I pulled her arm out. She then stared at her burnt skin, a motionless expression, as if she didn't feel pain, but was amused by how she could see her own flesh. She snapped out of it after I broke the silence. Are you okay, honey? Oh, right. This hurts really bad. Anna made a "that hurts" expression and then smiled, as if she was acting. I'll take you to the hospital. No, I'm fine. I just need some ice. To my surprise, she really was fine. There were no signs of burnt skin the next morning. She'd healed insanely fast. Another strange factor is I have the impression that she doesn't sleep. She just lies next to me and stays still. Before the disappearance, she always snored. Now, even after weeks, I've never heard her snore. On one of the nights, I woke up suddenly. She had her eyes open, staring at me. She closed her eyes immediately, pretending she was asleep. I needed answers. I dusted off a revolver that was in my possession, an inheritance from my late father. I started taking it to work, leaving it in the car, hoping that on the way home I would see that strange man in the middle of the forest again, and I could confront him a little more safely, armed with the lethal tool. After a few weeks of driving slowly and observing the forest, there he was again. That strange man standing in the middle of the forest. I stopped the car immediately and walked towards the figure. Cautious steps. Hello? Are you okay? I shouted as I approached, the revolver hidden in my back. The sighting became clearer as the distance shortened. He was a tall, middle-aged man with shaved hair. The peculiarity was in his expression. Despair and extreme sadness inhibited that static, unblinking face. I stopped a few meters from him. He did not move, nor did he respond to my interactions and attempts at dialogue. I punched his arm and screamed in his ear. Not a muscle trembled. Suddenly, he ran off into the trees. I went after him. It wasn't easy to chase him in the dense forest, but with my hunger for answers, I got up immediately whenever I tripped over logs and stones, and ignored the tears in my skin caused by the tangles and branches. After a long journey, the man crossed some dense bushes, seeming to go underground. I stopped for a moment, my lungs complaining from the straining beyond their usual capacity. After recovering, I continued to follow him, crossing the dense bush and discovering a cave. The beginning was rough and torturous, as expected in such an environment. After walking a few dozen meters, I came across a dead end. The man I was following couldn't have just vanished into thin air, so I surveyed my surroundings, illuminating with my cell phone. Underneath a rock there was a button. I pressed it, and an opening in the wall occurred, revealing a laboratory. This is getting so deep.
What the fuck is happening?
I don't know. It's becoming very forest-ish. Mostly white environment contained various research paraphernalia around it, and it was incredibly spacious considering the location. On one of the tables, an image gave me chills. With his chest open, a deformed man lay there, his organs in containers on the table beside him. I flinched as I heard an angry voice echoing from beyond one of the doors. I give up. This fucker runs aimlessly out of nowhere. As soon as I finish analyzing this one, I'll cut open that son of a bitch. There's no hope for him. I hid behind one of the counters when I noticed him approaching. It was a man in a lab coat, hair already white. I got up and pointed the gun at him. Who's the person on that table? He raised his hands in a sign of complicity. I didn't murder anyone if that's what you're thinking. This specimen was created in the laboratory. It died after a few days. There was a malformation of the brain. I'm just studying the errors in its creation. I shook my head, still trying to digest what he had said. My conclusion was that it didn't matter if it was true or not. I wouldn't trust that man. Something very wrong was happening, and it was probably related to Anna's disappearance and her coming back all weird. I pointed the gun at the door he emerged from. That door. Open it. Sir, this is a private laboratory. You are trespassing. I will ask you to open this fucking door. I'm running out of patience. He unlocked the door. Behind it, 3 cells. In one of them, the man I had followed was staring at the wall, not moving. And, sitting on the bed, a man identical to him. In the other cell, I shivered with what I saw, almost dropping the gun with the ease that ran through my body. She was there, her hair completely shaved. Otherwise, identical to the day she disappeared. The love of my life, Anna. She melted into tears as soon as she saw me. I ordered the scientist to open the cell and hugged her, confusion and happiness conflicting in my brain. Anna told me that she had been trapped in there the whole time, and despite the fact that they had drugged her a few times and performed experiments, that she had no idea of what they did because she was anesthetized. She had been treated well during the period. The scientist, upon seeing the scene, interacted with me. The clone. She's with you, isn't she? Clone? She's my masterpiece. The next human evolution. I created something better than divine creation. You need to give her back. We can pay you millions in compensation. I'm not giving anything back. She's not yours. She was born here. I raised her. Let me call my boss. You can take your wife, but return the specimen. You'll get rich. No! What do you think the creature that's living with you will do when the original one returns? She'll kill your Anna and try to steal her life, or maybe even kill you both. It's very dangerous to keep her with you. Bring her back. She was born in this laboratory and is alive for less than a year. It is an unstable and dangerous creation. I thought for a while. Besides all the strangeness, the woman at my house definitely had the same memories of my wife. She could remember things about the day we met, or the day that we got married. Upon observing my expressions, the scientist added, either you return with her with an agreement beneficial to both of us, or my boss gets her back by force. You choose. The woman in my house may not be the Anna I married, but she was still her. If I gave her back, she would serve as a guinea pig for the rest of her life, not to mention the bastard in front of me had kidnapped my wife. Rage dominated my whole body, as I remembered the 2 years of me staring at the door and thought about the dozens of scenarios of Anna being tortured and experimented on. I pulled the trigger. The bullet went through the scientist's forehead, creating a smear of blood and pieces of brain on the wall. I pointed the gun at the man sitting in the other cell along with the clone, who was still standing facing the wall, not moving a muscle. They kidnapped me too. Let me go, please. If I let you live, they'll know. They'll come after me. I'll hide. No one will ever know about me. I thought for a while. Even if the man hid, he could still be captured and tell about me. I looked at Anna and made the decision based on her expression. As my rage disappeared, staring at those brown eyes. I couldn't kill that innocent man. What was I thinking? So I released him, who asked me to lend him the gun. I declined, obviously. He walked into the lab, came back with a scalpel, and stabbed his clone, who didn't flinch or blink as he was struck, as if he didn't feel pain or emotions. I'm doing him a favor. Believe me, this is mercy. I looked at Anna, apprehensive about what he had done, but she reaffirmed me that the man was trustworthy. She must know. After all, they had been each other's only company during those 2 years. Upon getting home, Anna's clone looked at my wife with terror on her face, probably thinking that I had made some kind of deal with the scientist. I calmed her. but the awkwardness was only lessened after a lot of conversation. I found out about how Anna's clone had escaped. The scientist took his creations outside, studying how they interacted in an outdoor environment. The clone I followed must have run away in one of those tests. The second Anna is living with us as if she were a sister of the family. Despite the fact that I know she has all the memories of Anna, and, well, that time where I was alone with her, thinking that she was my wife. It's strange that both were being called Anna. Call me Diana. I think it's a nice inside joke. Plus, it's a name I like. This all happened last month. It's been hard to sleep. I'm afraid and anxious. I expect that, at any moment, some billionaire's henchman or some government task force will show up at my house and kill everyone. So far, I got lucky. I fear that maybe I've doomed myself. I don't think I'll go to the police either. I think it would only make everything worse and anger whoever was the owner of that lab. Now I understand why the scientist called the clone a masterpiece. She needs to sleep and eat a lot less than a normal human. These last few days, Diana is wandering around the house a lot more. Some days she goes to the yard and stares at us through the window. When I confronted her, she said that she was bored and was wondering how normal humans sleep, finding it funny how we lose 1/3 of our day just lying there, defenseless. Diana is staring at me as I'm writing this, smiling in a robotic way, as if she knows that I'm telling our story. I asked her if she wants me to put on something else for us to watch on the TV as we're all sitting on the couch, but she said that she's fine, that she just likes to look at me. I hope that I made all the right choices.
What the fuck?
That had so many layers to it and kept peeling back. It's like one of those like experimental indie horror films that either really hit or it just doesn't, and there's no in between.
That could probably be a good movie. He has both of them. Like, that's crazy. These are my wives. They're the exact same person.
Anna and Diana. We called the other one Diana because I thought my wife was dead.
Dude. That's crazy.
This hood is just like, doesn't want to stay straight.
Same.
God. I got a pansexual hood. Anyway, I was expecting something where, when he got to the laboratory, that there was going to be multiple clones of Anna and
I thought
possibly
he was
of
gonna
other
find
people.
like her dead body. And I was like, ooh.
We've played The Forest, not to be confused with Sons of the Forest, which is a video that is on the channel right now. You should go watch it. But anyway, the whole twist of you come across this cave system or whatever, and it just goes deep into this kind of scientific underground layer kind of deal. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know about you, but I kind of like this one. This was kind of fun.
Yeah, I like that one.
Top comment here. Could have been a millionaire and at home with just your wife, but no.
It's hard.
You had to have both. I mean, he couldn't do it. He couldn't kill the other one. And you know what? Does that make him less of a man?
No.
I was about to say that's for you all to decide.
Oh.
You've clearly made up your mind.
Damn right.
All right, so my final story here was posted by user PriestessOfSpiders. Like that name.
Me too.
My son's reflection is wrong. Before we get into this, I kind of have a thing with mirrors.
They freak me out.
Kind of always had a thing with mirrors. Kind of creep me out. I've always been afraid of mirrors, ever since I was a young child. I knew it was irrational, of course. I never was afraid when I would see my reflection in a puddle or the darkened window of a shop as I walked down the street. It was specifically mirrors which made me uncomfortable. I always feared that I would see something other than myself looking back at me. This explains why I was less than thrilled to find the large antique silver mirror in the bedroom of the house I was renting. Were it my own place, I would have thrown it out then and there, leaving it on the curb and relying solely upon the mirror in the modern and well-kept bathroom for all necessary reflective purposes. Alas, I didn't think my landlord would think too highly of his tenant tossing out expensive antique furniture, so I contented myself to simply move it into a spare room. I had moved to the house for the simple reason that it was fairly cheap and I don't have much other choice. My husband passed away earlier that year due to a heart condition, leaving me simultaneously a widow and solely responsible for the care of my son, Chester. Fortunately, my husband's life insurance policy turned out to be reasonably generous, but I still needed to downgrade our living situation if I was to take care of Chester without another source of income. Beyond the obvious fact that I have now been left to raise a child without the assistance of a spouse, there is another reason why I cannot supplement my funds by taking on a job. Chester is autistic.
Oh.
I want to make it very clear. I'm not an quote-unquote autism mom. I loathe the self-absorbed whiners who spend every second complaining about the immense burden of raising an autistic child, who bellyache endlessly about how difficult their lives are. I hate all the videos of exasperated parents recording their child's meltdown on camera to show all the world how difficult it is for them.
Preach, Queen.
I am disgusted whenever I see some selfish moron recommend ABA therapy to keep an unruly autistic child's more unconventional behaviors in check. My son is not a cross to bear, not a weight on my shoulders. He is my child, and I love him. I won't deny it can be difficult sometimes, but I can only imagine how hard it is for him. I find the terms quote-unquote high-functioning and low-functioning are relatively useless descriptors. Like most things in life, it is a tad more complicated than that. Chester is, generally speaking, nonverbal, and I've never known him to say more than 20 words in a single day. In addition, he tends to get overstimulated quite quickly from loud noises and often flaps his hands as a form of stimming, especially when he is having some difficulty expressing what he wants. The only behavior of his which ever actually frustrates me is his elopement, which in the context of autism means that he has a tendency to wander off or run away whenever he feels stressed. We work around these traits, and I think generally I've been able to make life quite comfortable for him. Chester has always shown quite an aptitude for reading and writing, despite his relatively young age of only 9 years old at the time we moved. When he needed something that couldn't be articulated through gestures or single words, he would write it down on a whiteboard I'd given him for this purpose. To help with the sensory issues regarding loud noises, I purchased a set of earplugs for him, the same set that one would wear at a gun range to prevent hearing loss. These generally aren't necessary within the confines of the house, but on those occasions when we do go out in public, I genuinely think they help him out quite a bit. Given his condition, combined with the relative isolation of our new rural home, it has been necessary to homeschool Chester. Through that, he hasn't really been any sort of a problem. Before I got married, I spent a few years teaching elementary school, so I already have the required skills. I've always believed in a somewhat more active approach to learning than some of my peers, and since our new home is located directly next to a forest, this was fairly easy to accomplish. The house itself was rather old, built in the 1920s, if my landlord was to be believed, while recently renovated to a more modern standard at some point in the preceding decades. It still has an air of oldness to it, something in the angles and general structure of the place. The main feature that seemed significantly out of place was the wrought iron fence that surrounded the house, a far cry from the traditional wooden fence I was used to from a life in the suburbs. There was no formal gate that led out to the forest behind the house, just a gap in the fencing with a small pile of rusting iron posts nearby. I never asked the landlord about it, but judging by a stump outside the boundaries of the backyard, I assumed a tree must have fallen down and damaged it. Children don't want to sit still and be lectured. They want to be outside, to run around and be active. I'd always try to teach Chester his lessons in a way that connected to the forest. I'd lift up logs and show him all the squirming creatures underneath so I could teach him all the differences between them. I'd have him count the rings of a fallen tree and teach him about the things that happened in the tree's long and storied life. I know that sometimes he would get bored. While I do believe kids love learning, I'm not an idiot. I know that sometimes children just want to run and play, but I genuinely do believe he got more out of our lessons in the woods than he would have gotten from a traditional school environment. Even outside of the context of Chester's lessons, we spent a lot of time in the woods, slipping out through the gap in the fence into the beyond forest. Into the forest beyond.
Into the beyond forest!
Come on, Chester, let's go to the beyond forest. Just look at the flowers, Chester.
It's okay. God.
There was something so peaceful about that place. It felt remarkably untouched by the civilization that bordered it. I'm not sure exactly how far the forest extended, but it always seemed to go on forever. Like, if you just kept walking, you could go the whole rest of your life surrounded by trees. I always kept a fairly close eye on Chester when we were out there. As much as I loved the place, I did often worry that he would simply run off, but there was never anything stressful enough in the woods to make him do so. The only real concern was to make sure he took off his shoes once he got back to the house, as otherwise he would track dirt inside, making quite the mess. Things went on the way I described them for about a year after my husband's passing. In between my caring for Chester and all the mundane errands of modern life, I attended therapy and worked to move on from the loss. I began to make peace with the fact that he was gone. Chester and I celebrated his 10th birthday out in the woods, moving to the backyard once night fell so we could finish off the evening roasting hot dogs over the fire pit while I read him some relatively tame ghost stories. Chester didn't like scary movies or violent video games, but gently spooky stories. The sort that send a pleasant chill down your spine. Made him quite happy. I believe I was reading out the mezzotint to him when we heard the music. It was a soft, strange sound. A faint piping emanating out from the forest beyond. The faint notes reminded me of the sound of panpipes, but not quite. If I listened very closely, I could almost discern a faint drumming as well. Chester looked out into the darkness beyond the fire, flapping his hands gently. He didn't seem upset or scared, just faintly awestruck. "Fairies," I heard him whisper. I felt somewhat uncomfortable as we both looked out into the blackness of the forest. The sound of crickets had died utterly as soon as the piping began, and we sat in silence, listening to that peculiar and otherworldly performance. It felt like something out of a dream, and I don't think it would be possible for me to recall the melody in any real detail. It was ephemeral somehow, slipping through the cracks of my memory, like water through a sieve, even as I listened. At some point, the music ceased, and the crickets returned to their chirping. I led Chester back inside and tucked him gently into bed. I've never been afraid of intruders, given how far away they were from any major population center. But that night, I double-checked that all the doors and windows in the house were firmly locked. I didn't sleep well that night. I'll admit I'd still not gotten used to sleeping alone, and often had difficulty falling asleep. But this felt different somehow. It seemed that whenever I was close to finally falling unconscious, I'd see a shadow pass across the wall, or hear something just on the very edge of my perception. Something that reminded me faintly of music. Whenever I jolt up in bed, looking or listening for what I had thought disturbed me, there was nothing there. At some point, I must have finally fallen asleep because I found myself blinking out in the daylight from my uncovered window, groggy and irritable. My skull throbbed with a terrible headache. My alarm clock hadn't gone off. It seemed to have been unplugged in the night. Possibly in my tossing and turning, the cord had somehow come out of the socket. It was in the late morning, far later than I usually woke up, and Chester was frustrated because he hadn't had breakfast yet. He didn't say anything, but he seemed glum and looked at me with justifiable annoyance and hunger. I did my best to prepare him some scrambled eggs and bacon, but in my pain and fatigue, I managed to burn the bacon and cook the eggs into an unpleasant, rubbery consistency. I deeply regret what happened next. I swore about the bacon, the eggs, the pan, the stove, the landlord, my dead husband, and anyone and anything that could conceivably be somewhat to blame for the ruined breakfast. I know it was wrong to react like that in front of my son. I know it was immature, but I was tired, in pain, and just wished desperately I could go back to my bed. When I'd finished with my profanity-laced rant, I heard the back door closing and looked out the window to see Chester fleeing out into the forest, visibly distressed. "Shit!" I muttered to myself and ran out the door after him, calling for him to come back. I tripped on one of the fallen iron fence posts and fell to the ground, knocking the air from my lungs. When I recovered enough to stand up, Chester was long gone, vanished amongst the trees. I looked through those woods for hours. As I've described earlier, I don't know how large the forest behind my house is, but it still feels odd that in all that time I never saw him. Chester's only 10 years old. He isn't some sort of Olympic sprinter. It was fairly far along in the afternoon when I finally decided to head back and call the police. Despite how long I'd spent in the forest, it was a remarkably quick walk back to the house. It felt almost as if the walk into the woods was somehow further than the walk out. I opened the door and started moving to the bedroom to get my phone, when suddenly I saw Chester sitting on the couch reading a book. I nearly wept with relief and rushed to hug him, apologizing over and over for scaring him and asking if he was okay. I was so happy to see my son again, I wasn't even angry with him for running off. "I'm alright, Mom. I'm really sorry for running off."
That's weird, because he's nonverbal.
"I'm alright, Mom. I'm really sorry for running off. I was just scared. I won't do that again. Please don't be angry," said Chester, tears welling up in his eyes. I froze. Chester rarely spoke more than a single word at a time. His longest sentences I could remember before this were maybe 3 or 4 words long at most. This was utterly unprecedented, and I had no idea how to react whatsoever. "Mom? Are you okay?" he asked, looking at me with a confused look on his face.
That ain't just
The next week went by very strangely. To be clear, autism isn't something that just goes away. It's not a disease. It's not something that can be cured. And yet, Chester no longer showed any signs of his previous behavior whatsoever. His personality seemed intact. The sort of things he now spoke aloud seemed relatively in keeping with the sentences he would have previously written on the whiteboard. He still had the same love of reading, the same interest in ghost stories. He played with the same toys. In all respects, he was the same exact boy as before, simply now he was neurotypical. He didn't have to wear earplugs out in public anymore, and true to his word, he never ran off under stress. He didn't even flap his hands, he just kept them calmly at his sides. It was totally surreal. One day, I was teaching him his lessons out in the woods, and he told me, "Mom, I think I want to go to regular school. I want to be with the other kids." I was completely taken aback. Chester had never shown even the slightest interest in going to a public school before this, and on the few occasions he'd had to interact with other children, he had been far too shy to play with them. Of course, I told him I'd be happy to send him to school. What else was I supposed to say? That night, I sent off emails to the nearest schools in the area, asking about late enrollment. It was the second week after Chester's sudden and unprecedented transformation that I'd begun to notice something that was strange. Despite the fact that we were spending a decent amount of time outside in the woods, Chester never left any dirty footprints in the house anymore. It wasn't that he had suddenly become more careful about taking his shoes off. He was still running inside with his sneakers on the same way he always had, but there was never any dirt or mud. I just assumed at the time he must have been wiping his shoes off while I wasn't looking, and in all honesty, I didn't pay it any much mind. It's only in retrospect, knowing what I do now, that this sticks out in my mind. He also didn't eat very much anymore. He didn't snack at all, and whenever I prepared him his meals, he only ate very small portions. He never showed any signs of weakness or that he was losing weight, so I didn't bother him about it. There would be no point in forcing him to eat more than he wanted to, but it did strike me as very odd. It wasn't until the incident with the mirror, that I realized it wasn't my son. I was looking for some books I'd packed away in cardboard boxes in the spare room. There wasn't a lot of spaces on the bookshelf in the living room, so I tended to switch out the books on a semi-regular basis for ones that were kept in the spare room, aside from a handful of mainstays. It was while I was doing so that Chester walked over to the doorway and asked me where I had put his toy robot. I looked up from what I was doing to answer him when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Something deeply wrong. It was the old silver mirror, pointed towards the doorway. It wasn't reflecting my son. I turned to look closer, my words dying on my lips as I gazed at the figure in the mirror. The old terror I'd always felt looking into such things, resurfacing suddenly and violently. The thing was dressed in Chester's clothes, but that was about the only real resemblance the thing bore to him. It was a crude marionette, carved from untreated and unpainted wood, clumps of bark still clinging to it in pieces. The mouth had a jaw like that of a ventriloquist dummy, albeit with crooked teeth made from sharp flints jammed into the wood. I saw bits of odd food stuck to the teeth and mouth, remnants of meals I had cooked earlier in the day. The eyes were simple holes with bits of colored glass, like marbles, held within. It was suspended above the ground by an inch or two by thick brown twine, like the sort one would use to close a package in days before packing tape. I stared in stunned silence at the mirror before turning around, only to find Chester standing there, head cocked slightly in confusion. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, with concern in his voice.
And that's when you punt that little bitch.
Punt that mother effing child back into the beyond forest where it belongs.
Fuck that.
I turned once again to the mirror, seeing the horrible puppet thing once again. I wanted to vomit as I watched its jaw work up and down mockingly. "I'm sorry, I'll find it myself. I didn't mean to bother you," it said, before jerkily, quote-unquote, walking down the hallway to Chester's bedroom. That night, I watched Chester carefully in the bathroom mirror when he brushed his teeth, but there didn't seem to be anything strange about him at all. He moved like a person, not a puppet, and when I gently squeezed his shoulder, I felt flesh and bone underneath the fabric of his clothes, not hard wood and bark. I didn't sleep. Creepy as it may sound, I just sat in Chester's room and watched that thing lay in bed snoring. It seemed to be asleep. I stayed there all night, just watching, until it woke up the next morning, asking me what I was doing. I didn't respond, and left without making breakfast. It's not like it would have needed it. I wasn't even sure where I was going at first. I was just driving to clear my head. I eventually realized I was en route to an antique store from the next town over. I'd visited the store a few times before, looking for bits of furniture and the like immediately after moving. I didn't know why I was headed there now, but it felt almost as if I were being drawn there somehow. I pulled into the parking lot and left my car, pushing through the shop's doors with the tinkling of a bell. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just wandered the store in a daze, looking around at all the various bits of junk and knickknacks with disinterest. The whole store reeked of musty boots and wood polish, the smell luring me into a trance as I meandered among the shelves stacked with discarded history. Eventually, though, I found something that struck my eye. It was a small old hand mirror with the telltale tarnishing of real silver. It seemed to call to me somehow, and in my numbed state, I didn't even fear the blank-eyed reflection that looked back at me. I picked it up and looked at the price tag. $50. More than it was worth, but not too unreasonable. I picked it up and brought it to the counter, paying in cash. The store's proprietor, a thin old woman with graying hair and enormous spectacles, enormous knockers, chuckled at me when she rang me up. Planning on making a vampire hunting kit, ma'am? She asked. What? I replied, the completely bizarre question startling me out of my stupor.
Just a little joke. Halloween's coming up, and once a few years back, I had a gentleman come in here and buy all sorts of strange stuff. I asked him what he needed it for, and he told me he was going to dress up as Abraham Van Helsing for the occasion. He said he was making a vampire hunting kit. One of the items he bought was an old hand mirror, quite like this one. He asked me if it was real silver, and I told him yes, but asked why that mattered. I figured silver was always the sort of thing one would use for werewolves, not vampires. He told me that the reason why vampires don't show their reflections in mirrors was that in the old days they were made of silver, and that silver was just a symbol of purity. He said that if vampires were real and walking nowadays, they'd be reflected back just fine, since nearly all modern mirrors are made with aluminum. Doesn't tarnish, I suppose. My mind flashed to Chester, brushing his teeth in the bathroom mirror, face as normal as could be reflecting back at me, before recalling the terrifying thing I'd seen in the old silver mirror. The old woman must have noticed me go pale. She asked me if I was all right. I nodded and left with the mirror driving back home. I got back around lunchtime, and the thing that pretended to be my son asked me if I was okay and if we would be having lunch soon. I angled the mirror so I could see its face and saw that crude puppet mouth wagging in vague time with its speech. I told it to wait at the dinner table and that I would be with it in a few minutes. It did as I said, sitting down and pretending to read a book with its glass eyes. I reached into the kitchen drawer and pulled out a pair of butcher's scissors. With the scissors in one hand and the hand mirror in the other, I walked up behind the puppet thing, carefully angling the mirror so I could see where the string connected to its wooden body. I looked to see where the strings led to see if I could get a glance at the puppeteer, but it seemed to just extend impossibly into the ceiling, passing through the plaster like a fishing line through water. It didn't notice what I was doing until I'd already cut the strings. One connected to its left arm. It screeched in what sounded like pain, a horrible distorted cry that was a mix of mad piping and a child's scream. It swiped at me with the right arm, but I was too fast for it. After all, it was only wooden strings, and I was alive. I cut the other arm free, and both now fell limp at its sides. Next, I went for the legs, snipping the strings in quick succession. Glancing up from the mirror, I saw what looked like my son floating in the air slightly, mouth wide open as it screamed. I cut the strings connected to its jaw and head. The thing collapsed to the floor in a silent heap. The illusion had been broken, and all that lay before me was a broken puppet. Far away in the distance, I could hear the sound of pipes playing faintly in the woods. A haunting melody, which I cannot quite recall. I knew I couldn't go to the police with any of this. Who would believe a woman who claimed that her son had been replaced by a puppet? I'd be institutionalized at best, arrested for child abuse at worst, and that's assuming they ever managed to find the real Chester. I spent the rest of the day frantically researching on the internet, typing inane phrases like child replaced puppet music pipes or puppet child mirror double into the search engine, getting almost nothing useful in response, until eventually I came across some old website detailing European folklore, specifically the page on changelings. I had read about medieval peasants convinced their children had been replaced with those of fairies, how their real children had been taken to the woods to be raised by the monsters which stole them. I read of the ways one could protect oneself from the so-called fair folk, of their hatred of iron. I remember the wrought iron fence that surrounded the house, the conspicuous gap where a tree must have broken through it as it fell. I've written this in case I don't come back. I've written this so that if I'm never found, they don't think I just performed a murder-suicide in the woods out of grief. I love my son dearly, and I'm going to save him from the monsters that took him from me.
I can hear the hideous music of their eldritch pipes drifting through the trees, mocking me. I'm taking one of the broken iron posts with me. The tip is as sharp as a spear. The end.
Damn. No, that's
not
what
to bring it back
crazy.
to Supernatural.
Oh my gosh.
In season 3, there is an episode where one of the Winchesters, Dean, goes to visit an old girlfriend of his, and the kids in the neighborhood have been kind of disappearing, and they've been replaced by to the parents, they see the kids, but then eventually when they see them in their reflection, they're like these disgusting, faceless, hollow-eyed, hollow-mouthed monsters. This is when Supernatural was actually good. But the idea of, your child... Just children in horror are just creepy. Just downright creepy.
Yeah.
Hands down. Then you add in mirrors. You add in things like the changeling lore. You add in the fact that they are not your child and that they are living in your house. And when she said that she stayed up all night watching the thing, imagine that thing knows that you're staring at it, and it knows that you have to sleep, and it's just fucking with you. It is totally aware that it doesn't have to sleep.
Yeah.
And the second you fall asleep, God knows what the fuck's going to happen.
Yeah, no,
God
that's
knows.
terrifying.
Speaking of kids, let's move on to yours.
Yeah, speaking of kids, is by user ByfelsDisciple. But before we get into that, I just want to thank them for letting me read their story. They also have a book. Their name is P.F. McGrail. They have a book called First Do No Harm. It's available on Amazon. We will link it in the description for anyone who wants to check it out. It looks pretty good. But yes, thank you, P.F. Big preach. This story is called Fucking Kids, Am I Right? Having a baby is terrifying enough without your next door neighbor's brutal murder. They could at least have put everything in one body bag. The rumor is that they didn't find the top half of him until the bottom half was already zipped up. So the crowd that had converged next door got to watch 2 separate gurneys roll Fred into an ambulance. The most horrifying part was seeing the paramedic vomit. They see the worst of the worst, so I can't even begin to imagine what actually happened to Fred. That was enough for me. My wife was home with Oliver, who was scheduled to wake up from his nap and make green shit while I was Jesus Christ. While I was changing him in about 15 minutes. So I turned around to leave the looky-loos and police to their speculation. That's when I saw the scratches in the ground. They were deep and long, like someone had taken a scythe to Fred's yard. Periodic slashes almost looked like footsteps as they led to his fence. The same fence that separated his yard from mine. Nauseating fear crept through my chest and froze my diaphragm as I realized that the claw marks had sliced their way up to the top of the fence, just like something had walked up it. I sprinted to my front door, terrified that I wasn't moving fast enough, while simultaneously not wanting to see what I might find inside. "What's wrong?" my wife asked as I burst through the door. I didn't slow down as I took the steps 2 at a time to the second floor. As I wheeled around the landing, bones of the 110-year-old house creaking, I could see through the window where the claw marks had torn through my back lawn. It disappeared from my angle of view directly below Oliver's room. I sprinted down the hall, skidding to a halt just in front of his doorway. For half a second, I balked. If something terrible was on the other side of the door, I was in the final good moment of my life. I held my breath and opened it. Oliver was sound asleep in his crib, completely whole. I belted a cry of relief and sank to the floor, trying to start my lungs again. I was so relieved that I didn't notice it at first. I opened my eyes, I stood up. His window was open. The claw marks traced down the wall across the floor and made a beeline directly to his crib. That's where they stopped. Gag reflex and bladder ready to fire, I walked over to my sleeping son, hands shaking uncontrollably. I stopped right next to him, looking down, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. How? His tiny, razor-sharp fingernails were coated in crimson that dripped along his open palms, staining his fingers red. I wanted to tell myself that it was red paint. It wasn't red paint. An oppressive copper smell swirled my thoughts as I stared at his slightly open, toothless mouth, covered in red from his eyes to his neck. A bloody snot bubble frothed from his nose, expanding and contracting with each breath. That wasn't the worst part, though. No. The worst part was that between his fingers, dangling from a severed optic nerve, was Fred's eyeball.
What the fuck? What?
Little man's a demon. That was
child is a demon. Who could have seen this coming? Fucking kids, am I right?
kids, am I right? That was awesome.
That was really good. No, that description of the claw marks from the window to the crib, all the way up to the description of just, I was like looking at my hands and everything. I was just like, what the hell?
A bloody snot bubble frothed from his nose, expanding and contracting with each breath. That wasn't the worst part, though. No, the worst part was between his fingers, dangling from a severed optic nerve, was Fred's eyeball.
That's so good.
It's so good.
That's a good opening for a horror movie.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as that happens, there should be a title card immediately followed by that. I know that that's the ending, but that could be an awesome intro to a horror movie or story as well. If that was just the beginning of the story, I would, because I want more of that.
I know. That would be cool if you started a whole series.
Well, I mean, we can go read PF's book.
That's true. First, do no harm. Check it out on Amazon. So for my next story, it's posted by user Young Garlic. Thank you so much for letting me read this story, my man. Big preach. If you want to go check it out, it'll be in the description. All these stories will be in the description. This one's called, Please Don't Read This Post in Public. Disclaimer, please don't read this post in public. Don't read it on a computer or an iPad, or any large screen for that matter. Even if you I know. Even if you live alone, don't sit with your back facing a larger room. If someone or something was particularly good at hiding, slender, quiet, and quick, they could easily be in the same room as you, peering in through a window or tucked behind the furniture. Ideally, read it on your phone, lying on your back, with the screen no less than 6 inches from your face. Please keep the lights on. It makes it harder for them to get close to you. Think about whether you heard something out of the ordinary in the last few hours, such as a creak in the floorboards, the knock of something bumping into furniture, or a door inexplicably opening or shutting. If you have, please close Reddit and stop reading. There's a good chance something is watching you. That was just a disclaimer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I live in Auckland, New Zealand. Me and my girlfriend live in uni accommodation in the city. I lost contact with my high school friends, so practically my entire friend group lives in the same building. The uni dorms are very large, very full, and unsurprisingly, very loud. It's common to see and hear drunk students and party guests throughout the halls at night. You begin to tune it out over time and stop paying attention. Perhaps that's why they were less careful around us. Anyway, orientation week was coming up, and my mates and I thought it would be a good night to go out clubbing. I don't know if it's the same everywhere else, but all nightclubs here treat orientation like it's Christmas. Toga parties, angel and devil nights, the whole lot. The rest of my group chat hardly ever even replies to messages like this, but I can always count on Ethan and Andre to come out to town. So last Wednesday, we headed to Sapphire. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Sapphire. It's always too crowded, and there's no seating whatsoever, but Andre was set on going to this gig tonight, so me and Ethan kind of just followed. We got into the club with no problem, as we had only a few pre-drinks. I thought I saw someone cut in front of us as the bouncer was checking our IDs, but they couldn't have. There was another bouncer on the other side who didn't seem to see anything, so I didn't really react to it. Andre went off to mosh while me and Ethan went to order drinks. Ethan orders a beer, I order a Jaeger bomb. Just as the bartender hands me my drink, I hear Ethan's voice next to me. Is that dude staring at us? I paid no attention to Ethan. I didn't even look around, because I was too busy paying the bartender. I didn't really even take in his words because I was too busy wondering how a shot of Jaeger and Red Bull could combine to cost $12. But before I could reply, a full bottle of beer shattered around my feet. Ethan's beer. I flicked around to see what had happened. Ethan wasn't stupid, and he wasn't drunk. Had someone knocked it out of his hand? But Ethan was gone. At first, I assumed he had just headed into the mosh pit to hang out with Andre. But then the bartender spoke up. Did you see that? She laughed, before looking around confused. See what? I replied, a bit bewildered by the whole situation. She replied, I swear, I just saw someone run into your mate. I looked behind me, looked at the ground. No Ethan to be seen. Looking at the floor, I think I remember a pair of legs sprinting past me, but I was focused on looking for Ethan, so I didn't really register them or react to them. Confused, I looked up to the bartender. She was gone as well? Where had she gone? There was another customer...
Heaven.
There was another customer behind me in the line, and she was the only one behind the till, so she wouldn't just leave her post like that. I was beginning to get freaked out. I pushed my way to the mosh pit to Andre. Maybe Ethan was with him. Andre was in his own world. Dancing in the mosh pit, he was focused on the DJ, focused on the girls, focused on dancing along with everyone else. As far as I can tell, no one but me even saw what was behind, or what was standing behind him. I can't tell you what I saw for a reason I'll explain later, But trust me when I say this thing was not human. Although, yet human enough that it could almost blend into a crowd like this. Almost. I was about to call out, to scream or point, to call security to signal to Andre to run. Thank God I didn't, because as soon as the creature turned around to face me, everything clicked. Ethan tried to point something out to me, and then he vanished. The bartender called out his attacker, and she vanished too. Yet Andre and everyone around him were minding their own business, and they were fine. As it turned around to face me, its hideous features burned into the back of my eyelid. I calmly brought out my phone and began texting my girlfriend. I'm coming home. Do not text me. Keep the doors locked until I arrive. I'll explain everything when I get there. I turned around as calmly as I could and walked away. I walked up the stairs and turned up the road. I heard a side door open. I did not react. I heard footsteps scuttling behind me. I did not turn around. Then, Andre's voice, "Yo, Cody, where are you going?" I prayed to whoever was listening that the creature was well hidden again, that Andre would not see it talking to me. I almost broke down. I wanted to scream at him to leave, but I just couldn't. So I continued walking. Then he said it. "Who's that with you?" As far as I could tell, those were his last words. I walked to the halls. I wanted to cry, but this thing was still sussing me out. I wanted to break down in tears, but I knew what would happen if I registered this thing's existence. I started to wonder if leading this thing home was even the smart thing to do, but I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to curl up in bed, stay under the covers until whatever this thing was decided I was deaf or blind or stupid enough to leave me alone. I unlocked the gate, it clambered over the wall. I got in the elevator, it got in with me. The whole ride, it was towering over me, staring at me, wondering how I hadn't noticed it yet. I walked to my apartment.
Hello!
Hello! I am right here. I walked to my apartment and knocked on the door. My girlfriend called out to me. The second she yelled out, the creature vanished, sprinting away at an unnatural speed down the hallway, ducking behind what I think was a bin. I don't know, I wasn't looking. I called out to my girlfriend, who impishly opened the door, clearly terrified by my text. The thing was very well hidden, yet the hallway had very little cover. Whatever this thing was, it could conceal itself very well. Not that it mattered, because as my girlfriend opened the door, I saw it. The creature's face pressed up against the window behind her, watching me. But it was different. The features were slightly screwed, slightly changed. The daunting realization hit me that no doors had opened in the hallway, and we were 6 stories up. This was not the same creature. As my girlfriend turned around, the face at the window ducked out of sight. She turned back to me. It rose back up. The face could switch from pressing its face against the window to vanishing beneath it with such seamless efficiency. I'd had to remind myself I couldn't allow myself to be mesmerized by its movement. My girlfriend was being watched, but she would never have any idea. Had it been here all night? All week? How long had this thing been here? Pressing its monstrous face against the window and yet somehow staying out of sight. I quietly explained to her what had happened, starting by explaining that she couldn't react to what I said, no matter what. Then explaining the creature's details, what it looked like. Maybe it was stupid, but I had never been more stressed and confused in my life, and I just wanted someone to talk to. She calmly gulped. A tear rolled down her face. She wandered over to the cupboard and started sifting through papers. I wondered if she even believed me, or whether she was just taking my act natural advice very seriously. Then she pulled out the drawing. A child's drawing. Her childhood drawing. A young girl surrounded by at least half a dozen tall, inhuman figures. I didn't get a good look. 1 second she was there in the hallway, the next I couldn't even recognize her corpse. A third creature stood in her place. Her lifeless body broken and bloodied on the carpet. Her arms and legs were mangled and twisted like broken twigs. Her face, unidentifiable. If you were hoping to get a proper description of these things, I'm sorry. Now you know why that isn't going to happen. I would rather die than allow someone to recreate that drawing. God forbid someone ever posts a sketch of this thing on the internet. Terror doesn't even begin to describe what I was feeling. Face to face, finally, with this thing, but it got worse when I heard the window shatter, and the door break down. All 3 creatures, standing in my dining room, staring down at me as I sat, staring at my girlfriend's mutilated corpse. The creatures stood and waited, and waited, and waited, until finally I stood up, walked over to the fridge, took out a beer, sat right back down in my chair, and drank it calmly. I don't know what kind of primal willpower I had in that moment, what kind of drive or mental strength I had during the worst minutes of my life, but after I did, the creatures left. In the blink of an eye, the body had been removed and the blood was cleaned up. A few days later, I walked into the station to help clear the air about missing friends. Ethan, Andre, and my girlfriend have all gone down among an ever-growing list of missing people. I wonder how many others are missing for the same reason. How many innocent people are in jail, blamed for these monsters' crimes. I needed to make this post. I need to let people know. They no longer hide from me. They are everywhere. You couldn't possibly comprehend how many you walk past every day. How many are watching you as you drive to work. You have no idea how many dark corners they lurk in and how many windows they stand outside. You haven't seen how many roofs they cling to, the crowds they stand among. If you share this to your loved ones, make sure they read it lying down. Remind them to read it on a phone, and tell them to hold the phone no less than 6 inches from their face. Because more often than not, you are not alone.
Why did you read that to me then?
Because I can.
Over Discord and not the phone and while I'm lying down.
Well, guys, we really hope you enjoyed these stories. If you have any other subreddits you guys want us to check out that are, around the same theme, just let us know.
Briannis, where can they find you?
You can find me on any social media at Certicate.
You can follow me on pretty much every social media at The Dairy Boy. And we just wanted to also, one more time, thank everybody for letting us read their stories. Young Garlic, PF McGrail, PriestessOfSpiders, and King Payman 23. Thank you all so much for letting us read your stories. Also, all of these Reddit users that we just mentioned are writers themselves, so we'll leave their links in the description below, as well as other projects that they wanted us to link. And you guys can go find them there, and please go support them. They are original artists, and me personally, you should support. Me personally, I think that you should support writers and artists like this, because they put a lot of their time and effort into these kinds of things, and I think that they should be supported. So if you're interested in any of their stories that you heard or interested in their work, please go show those some love and check them out. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you once again for some more scary content down the road. See you guys. All hail kill. He walked into the lab, came back with a scalpel, and stabbed his clone, who didn't flinch or blink as he was struck, as if he didn't feel pain. It was the second week after Sester. No, this isn't Chester. This is actually Sester.
Yeah.